The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and decay down from the mountains, swirling through the muddy streets of Cedar Ridge. It was a small town, barely more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the wilderness, where men came to forget their names and women came to lose their hopes. Jacob Sullivan stood at the edge of town, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. His leather coat, worn thin at the elbows, had seen 20 winters in these mountains. His beard, once dark as coal, now showed streaks of gray that matched the color of the October sky. Folk in town called him Old Jake when they bothered to speak of him at all, which wasn't often. Mountain men were tolerated in Cedar Ridge only as long as they brought furs to trade and kept their troubles to themselves. Jake's boots squelched in the mud as he made his way down Main Street. The weight of pelts on his back was lighter than the weight he carried in his chest, a burden that had settled there 5 years ago and never lifted. He kept his eyes down, avoiding the suspicious glances from townsfolk who peered through dusty windows. To them, he was just another wild man from the hills, probably half mad from too many winters alone. The Broken Wheel Saloon squatted at the center of town like a wounded animal. Someone inside was attempting to play a tune on an out-of-tune piano, the notes falling flat and wrong in the afternoon air. Jake pushed through the doors, and the conversations inside stuttered to a halt. Eyes tracked him as he made his way to the bar, measuring him, judging whether he was worth the trouble of acknowledgement. "Whiskey," Jake said to the bartender, his voice rough from disuse. He'd gone 3 weeks without speaking to another soul, and the words felt strange in his mouth. The bartender, a thin man with nervous hands, poured without comment. Jake had been coming here twice a year for 5 years, and they'd exchanged maybe 50 words total. That suited them both fine. As Jake nursed his drink, trying to wash away the taste of loneliness, the saloon doors burst open. A man stumbled in, bringing with him the stench of cheap liquor and desperation. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his eyes had the wild look of a cornered animal. "I got something to sell," the man announced, his words slurring together. "Prime goods, for any man with coin." The saloon patrons turned away, recognizing the signs of a man at the end of his rope. In Cedar Ridge, desperation was as common as dust, and most folks had learned to mind their own business. But then the man reached behind him and pulled someone forward, a small girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Her dress was patched and faded, her hair tangled, but it was her eyes that made Jake's hand tighten on his glass. They were blue as winter ice and held a wariness that no child should possess. "My daughter," the man said, pushing the girl forward like she was livestock. "Strong girl, good for work, cook, clean, whatever you need. $50 and she's yours." The silence in the saloon grew heavy as lead. Men looked away, studied their drinks, found fascinating patterns in the wooden tables. The bartender polished a glass that was already clean. Jake had seen plenty of ugliness in his years. He'd watched men kill for gold, seen families torn apart by hunger and disease. But something about this moment, about the way the girl stood there with her chin up despite the trembling in her hands, reached through his numbness and grabbed hold of something he'd thought long dead. "Ain't nobody want your brat, Thompson." One of the card players finally said, "Take her home and sober up." Thompson's face flushed red. "She ain't mine to keep no more. Her mama's dead. And I got debts. $50. I said, "That's fair." The girl's fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress, but she didn't cry. Jake noticed she had a small bundle clutched against her side, everything she owned in the world. Probably. His chest tightened, remembering another child who'd once carried her treasures in a similar bundle before the fever took her. $40, someone called from the back. Jake's head snapped around. It was Hiram Walsh, who ran the boarding house at the edge of town. The look in his eyes made Jake's skin crawl. 45. Thompson countered eagerly, hope lighting his face. Jake stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and every eye in the room turned to him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with the season's earnings. Without counting, he tossed it on the bar. "Whatever's in there," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The girl comes with me." Thompson scrambled for the pouch, fingers shaking as he opened it. His eyes widened at the contents. More than $50. Certainly more than he'd dreamed of getting. "Sold," he said quickly. Before Jake could change his mind, he shoved papers at Jake, some kind of makeshift deed he'd scrawled. "She's yours, mountain man, and good riddance." The girl looked up at Jake then, and he saw his own Elizabeth in those blue eyes, Elizabeth who'd been just this age when the fever swept through their valley. Elizabeth who'd asked him to sing to her as she lay dying, and he'd tried, but his voice had broken on every note. Jake signed the papers without reading them. Thompson snatched them back, grabbed the money pouch, and was out the door before anyone could speak. The saloon remained silent, watching to see what the mountain man would do with his purchase. Jake looked down at the girl, up close. He could see the faint bruise on her cheek, the way she held herself ready to run or fight. Smart child. In this world, trust was a luxury few could afford. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice soft.
"Sarah,"
she whispered.
"Sarah Thompson, but I guess it ain't Thompson no more."
"It's whatever you want it to be," Jake said. He gestured to her bundle. "That all you got?" She nodded, clutching it tighter. "Well then, Sarah, we got a long walk ahead. Best get started before the rain comes." He turned and headed for the door, not looking back to see if she followed. But he heard her small footsteps behind him, quick and uncertain on the saloon's wooden floor. The patrons parted to let them pass, and Jake caught fragments of whispered conversations already starting. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving dark clouds down from the peaks. Jake stopped at the general store to buy supplies, warm clothes for the girl, boots that might actually fit her feet, enough food for the journey to his cabin. The shopkeeper's wife looked at Sarah with pity, but said nothing. In Cedar Ridge, people had learned that pity without action was safer than getting involved. As they left town, Jake noticed Sarah looking back, perhaps searching for the man who'd called himself her father. But Thompson was long gone, probably already drinking away his windfall in some other saloon. "He ain't coming back," Jake said quietly. "I know," Sarah replied, and the acceptance in her voice nearly broke him. No child should sound so resigned to abandonment. They walked in silence as Cedar Ridge faded behind them, and the mountain trail began. Jake shortened his stride to match hers, watching from the corner of his eyes as she struggled with her bundle and tried to keep up. Pride. He recognized. She wouldn't ask for help until she collapsed. "Here," he said, stopping beside a fallen log. "Let's rest a spell. Long way to go yet." Sarah sat gratefully, though she tried to hide her relief. Jake pulled some jerky from his pack and offered it to her. She took it with a quiet "thank you" and ate slowly, as if she'd learned to make food last. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "Got a cabin up in the hills. It ain't much, but it's warm and dry. Got a good stove and plenty of firewood." "You live alone?" The question hit harder than she could have known. "Yeah," Jake said. "Been alone for a while now." Sarah studied him with those two wise eyes. "You don't look mean," she said finally. "Not like some of Papa's friends." Jake didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he stood and shouldered his pack again. "Storm's coming. We'd best move on." As they climbed higher into the mountains, the town disappearing into the valley below, Jake wondered what he'd done. He'd acted on instinct, driven by memories and ghosts. But now, reality was setting in. He was a man who'd chosen isolation after loss had hollowed him out. What did he know about caring for a child, especially one who'd already seen too much of the world's cruelty? But then he looked at Sarah, trudging determinedly beside him, her small face set with a courage that shouldn't be necessary. And he knew he couldn't have done otherwise. Maybe they were both broken. both running from different kinds of pain. Maybe that was enough of a foundation to build something new. The first drops of rain began to fall as they entered the forest proper. Jake pulled an oilskin from his pack and draped it over Sarah's shoulders. She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her features.
Thank you,
she said again, and this time, there was something like trust beginning to form in her voice. Jake nodded and continued walking, leading her deeper into the mountains, away from the town that had failed her, toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. Behind them, Cedar Ridge grew small and distant, taking with it the ugliness of what had transpired in that saloon, leaving only the rain and the wind and two souls finding their way through the wilderness together. The rain had turned the mountain trail into a river of mud. Jake's boots found purchase on rocks and roots, but behind him, he could hear Sarah struggling. Her new boots were already caked with dirt, and more than once he heard her slip and catch herself. "Not much farther," he said over his shoulder, though that was only half true. They still had 2 hours of climbing ahead, and the storm was getting worse. Thunder rolled across the peaks like God's own fury. Sarah flinched at each crash but kept moving. Jake recognized the determined set of her jaw he'd seen it before in Elizabeth, that stubborn Sullivan strength that wouldn't admit defeat. The trail wound through a grove of ancient pines, their branches offering some shelter from the downpour. Jake stopped beneath the largest tree and turned to check on the girl. She was soaked despite the oilskin, her hair plastered to her head, but she wasn't complaining. "We'll rest here a minute," he said. Sarah nodded, leaning against the tree trunk, in the dim light filtering through the storm clouds. She looked even smaller, more fragile. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a yoke.
Mr.
Sarah's voice was barely audible over the rain.
Jake,
he said. "Just call me Jake."
Jake,
she repeated, testing the name.
"How come you were in town today? You don't seem like you go there much."
"Perceptive child. Had furs to trade. Only go twice a year, spring and fall." "Lucky for me," she said quietly. Jake didn't know how to respond to that. Lucky wasn't a word he'd associated with himself in years. He pulled out his water flask and handed it to her. "Drink. Still got a ways to go." As Sarah drank, Jake studied her more carefully. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she had a delicate face, with high cheekbones that would serve her well when she grew. Her mother must have been pretty. He wondered what had happened to the woman, how Thompson had ended up alone with a daughter he was willing to sell. "Your ma," he started, then stopped. Maybe it was too soon for such questions. But Sarah seemed to understand.
"Died last winter, the coughing sickness. Papa said it was her own fault for being weak."
Jake's hands clenched into fists. The coughing sickness consumption had taken so many. It wasn't about weakness. It was about luck and God's own mysterious ways. "Weren't her fault," he said firmly. "Don't you believe that?" Sarah looked up at him with those ice-blue eyes, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of something hope. Maybe, or just relief that someone had contradicted her father's cruel words. They pushed on through the storm. The trail grew steeper, winding between boulders slick with rain. Jake found himself looking back more frequently, watching Sarah navigate the treacherous path. She was tiring. He could see it in the way her steps grew less certain, but still she pressed on. Finally, as the last gray light was fading from the sky, Jake's cabin came into view. It squatted solid and reassuring against the hillside, smoke still trickling from the chimney where he'd banked the fire that morning.
"There it is,"
he said, pointing. Sarah looked up, blinking rain from her eyes. The cabin wasn't much to look at, a single-room structure built from logs Jake had cut and notched himself, with a stone chimney and a roof of split shingles. But it was sturdy, built to withstand the mountain winters.
"It's nice,"
Sarah said, and Jake could hear she meant it. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. Jake lit a lantern and stirred the banked coals in the fireplace. adding kindling until flames began to dance. Sarah stood just inside the door, dripping on the packed earth floor, looking around with careful eyes. It was a simple space, a bed in one corner, covered with bearskins. A table and 2 chairs. He'd built the second chair out of habit, though no one had sat in it for 5 years. Shelves along one wall held his few possessions: traps, tools, some books, dried herbs and roots. A rifle hung above the fireplace. "You can put your things there," Jake said, pointing to a corner near the fire. "Get warm. I'll make some food." Sarah set down her bundle carefully, as if it contained precious treasures. Jake busied himself with preparing a simple meal: beans he'd left soaking, salt pork, some of the bread he'd bought in town. The familiar actions calmed him, gave him something to do with his hands while his mind wrestled with the enormity of what he'd done. When he turned back with 2 plates, he found Sarah had opened her bundle. Inside were a few pieces of clothing, a small rag doll with button eyes, and something wrapped in faded cloth. She was holding the wrapped object, staring at it with an expression of such longing that Jake had to look away. "What's that?" he asked gently, setting the plates on the table. Sarah unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. A woman's face looked out from it, beautiful despite the formal stiffness required by the long exposure.
"Mama,"
Sarah said simply.
Papa wanted to sell it, but I hid it."
Jake felt his throat tighten. He'd done the same with Elizabeth's things, hidden them away from Mary's grieving fury, saved what little he could of his daughter's short life. "You did right," he said. "A person should have something to remember their ma by." They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling and the rain drumming on the roof. Sarah was clearly hungry, but ate with careful manners, cutting her meat into small pieces, using her fork properly. Someone her mother most likely had taught her well. When the meal was finished, Jake cleared the plates and considered the sleeping arrangements. He'd been so focused on getting the girl away from Thompson in that saloon that he hadn't thought about the practical matters. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll make up a pallet by the fire." Sarah shook her head quickly.
"I can sleep on the floor. I don't want to take your bed."
"You'll take the bed," Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's warm and dry, and you need the rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent." He pulled clean blankets from a trunk, shaking them out. They smelled of cedar and long storage. As he arranged them on the bed, Sarah stood and approached him hesitantly.
"Jake,"
her voice was very small.
Are you going to sell me like Papa did when you need money?"
The question hit him like a physical blow. Jake's hands stilled on the blankets, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then, to his horror and shame, he felt tears burning in his eyes. He turned away, but not before Sarah saw. He sank into one of the chairs, his big hands covering his face as years of buried grief broke through the dam he'd built. He wept for Elizabeth, for Mary, for the family he'd lost and the man he'd become. He wept for this small, brave girl who'd learned too young that even parents could betray you. When he finally looked up, Sarah was standing before him, her own eyes wet with tears. She reached out tentatively and placed her small hand on his knee.
"I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to make you sad."
Jake wiped his face with rough hands. "No, child, don't you apologize. You asked a fair question, and you deserve an answer." He took a deep breath, meeting her eyes.
"I ain't going to sell you, not ever. You got my word on that, and a Sullivan's word is iron. You're safe here. Sarah, safe as I can make you."
Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Some of the tension eased from her small shoulders. "I had a daughter once," Jake found himself saying. "Elizabeth, she was about your age when the fever took her. Her and her ma both. That was 5 years ago." He gestured around the cabin. "Been alone up here since then. Didn't think I'd ever, but when I saw you in that saloon, saw what was happening, I couldn't just walk away."
"I'm glad you didn't,"
Sarah said softly. Jake managed a small smile. Get some sleep now. Morning comes early in the mountains. Sarah climbed into the bed, looking tiny beneath the bearskins. Jake banked the fire and made his pallet on the floor, but sleep was a long time coming. He lay awake listening to the rain and Sarah's breathing as it gradually deepened into sleep. What had he done? He was a broken man living like a hermit, nursing wounds that wouldn't heal. What business did he have taking in a child? But then he remembered the look in Walsh's eyes, remembered Thompson's eager greed, and knew he'd had no choice. Sometimes fate put you in a place where the only decision was between bad and worse. Near midnight, Sarah cried out in her sleep. Jake was on his feet instantly, moving to the bedside. She was thrashing in the blankets, caught in some nightmare. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Easy, little one. You're safe. Just a bad dream. Sarah's eyes flew open, wild with fear, then focused on his face. Jake! I'm here. You're in the cabin. Remember, you're safe. She nodded, rubbing her eyes. I dreamed Papa came back, said you didn't really want me, that nobody would ever want me. Jake's jaw clenched. What kind of man put such thoughts in his own child's head? That was just a dream talking. Your papa's gone, and he ain't coming back. And as for wanting, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe we can help each other. I've been alone too long, and you need a place to be. Could be we both get something we need. Sarah considered this with that too adult wisdom. Like a trade, but a good trade, where both people win. Something like that. Jake agreed. Now close your eyes. Tomorrow I'll show you around the place. Teach you how things work up here. Going to be different from town living. I don't mind different, Sarah said, already drowsy again. Different might be better. As Jake returned to his pallet, he thought she might be right. Different might indeed be better for both of them. The rain was easing now, and through the window, he could see stars beginning to peek through the clouds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for tonight, there was a child sleeping safe in his bed and a feeling in his chest that might, if he was careful with it, grow into something like hope. The morning sun painted the cabin walls gold, and Jake woke to find Sarah already sitting up in bed, watching him with those careful eyes. He'd slept poorly on the hard floor, but it was a small price for seeing her safe and rested. Morning, he said, stretching stiff muscles. Hungry? She nodded, climbing out of bed still wearing her damp dress from yesterday. Jake frowned. He'd bought her new clothes, but they needed washing first. Everything the child owned seemed touched by neglect. There's a trunk by the wall, he said. Some old clothes in there. Might find something to wear while yours dry. Sarah opened the trunk hesitantly. Jake turned away, busying himself with the fire. Those were Mary's things, and some of Elizabeth's clothes he'd been unable to burn or bury, packed away with the grief he couldn't face. Hearing the rustle of fabric was like listening to ghosts walk. This is pretty, Sarah said softly. Jake looked over to see her holding one of Elizabeth's dresses, a blue calico Mary had sewn the Christmas before they died. It would be too big for Sarah, but not by much. You can wear it, he managed. Elizabeth would have liked that. While Sarah changed behind the blanket he'd strung up for privacy, Jake prepared breakfast flapjacks with the last of his maple syrup, strong coffee for himself, and heated milk for her. The simple domesticity of it all made his chest ache. They ate in silence until Sarah asked, "What do you do all day up here?" "Depends on the season." Jake replied, "Check trap lines in winter, hunt when needed, fix what's broken, gather plants for medicine and food. Always something needs doing." "Could you teach me?" The question surprised him. "You want to learn mountain ways?" Sarah's chin lifted. "I want to be useful. Mama always said idle hands were the devil's workshop." Smart woman. Her mother. "All right then, we'll start with something simple." After breakfast, Jake led Sarah outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks already white with early snow. Sarah stood very still, taking it all in.
"It's so big,"
she whispered.
"That it is. Come on, first lesson."
He showed her the spring where they got their water, teaching her to check for debris and how to carry the heavy bucket without spilling. She struggled with the weight but didn't complain. Next came the woodpile, where he demonstrated the proper way to stack split logs.
"Why does it matter how they're stacked?"
Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Air needs to move through, keep them dry. Wet wood smokes, won't burn clean. He repositioned a few logs. Everything up here has a reason. You do things right, the mountain takes care of you. Do them wrong. He didn't finish, but Sarah understood. As the morning wore on, Jake found himself surprised by how quickly she learned. She had clever hands and a good memory, repeating his instructions back perfectly. When he showed her which plants near the cabin were safe to eat and which to avoid, she asked questions that showed real understanding. My grandma knew about plants, Sarah offered as they examined some late-blooming yarrow. Before she died, she tried to teach Mama, but Papa said it was foolish women's work. Your Papa was wrong about a lot of things. Jake said, knowing plants can save your life up here. This yarrow good for wounds, stops bleeding. That pine bark can ease a cough. Knowledge like that's worth more than gold. They worked through the morning, and Jake noticed Sarah gradually relaxing. Her movements became less cautious, and once or twice he caught her almost smiling. It was like watching a wild creature decide whether to trust. When the sun reached its peak, they returned to the cabin for dinner, cold biscuits and dried venison. As they ate, Sarah suddenly spoke. Mama wasn't weak. Jake set down his food, giving her his full attention. Papa said she was, but she wasn't. She worked in other people's houses, washing and cleaning. Even when she was sick, she'd cough so hard at night I thought she'd break apart. But come morning she'd get up and go to work anyway. Sarah's voice grew fierce. She only stopped working 3 days before she died. That's not weak. No, Jake agreed quietly. That's about the strongest thing I know. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Papa started drinking more after she died. Said I reminded him of her, and he couldn't stand it. Said I was another mouth he couldn't afford to feed. She looked up at Jake. Was I really worth $50? The question nearly undid him. Jake reached across the table and took her small hand in his large, calloused one.
"Listen to me, Sarah. A person's worth ain't measured in dollars. Your Papa, sometimes grief makes people do terrible things, makes them forget what matters. But that's his failing, not yours."
Did grief make you come up here alone? The question was asked with such innocent directness that Jake couldn't take offense. I suppose it did. Couldn't bear the memories down in the valley. Thought if I got far enough away, it wouldn't hurt so much. Did it work? Jake considered lying, but this child had seen enough dishonesty. No, just made me lonely on top of sad. Sarah squeezed his hand with her small fingers.
Maybe we don't have to be lonely now.
That afternoon, Jake set about making the cabin more suitable for 2 people. He strung up a better divider to give Sarah privacy and cleared a space for her few possessions. While he worked, she explored the cabin more thoroughly, examining his books with interest. Can you read? He asked.
Some. Mama taught me letters and small words, but she died before.
Sarah trailed off. Maybe we can work on that come winter. Long evenings, not much else to do. Her face lit up the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her features, showing the child beneath the wariness. As dusk approached, Jake prepared their supper, a rabbit stew he'd had simmering all afternoon. Sarah helped, cutting vegetables with careful precision after he showed her how to handle the knife safely. They worked well together, moving around each other in the small space without awkwardness. After they'd eaten and cleaned up, Sarah retrieved her mother's picture and set it carefully on the shelf. Is it all right if she stays there? She asked. Of course. This is your home now, too. The words came out before Jake could stop them, but he found he meant them. Home. He hadn't thought of the cabin that way in years. It had just been a place to exist, to hide from the world and his memories. As bedtime approached, Sarah grew quiet again. She changed back into Elizabeth's nightgown. They'd washed her clothes and hung them by the fire to dry and climbed into bed. But Jake could tell something was bothering her.
What is it, little one?
Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a very small voice, "What if you change your mind? What if you wake up tomorrow and decide you don't want a girl around after all?" Jake moved to sit on the edge of the bed. In the firelight, he could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of a child who'd learned that even parents could abandon you.
You know what a promise is, Sarah.
She nodded. "Well, I'm going to make you one now, I promise, on my daughter's memory, that you have a home here as long as you want it. I ain't going to sell you, send you away, or change my mind come morning. You're stuck with me, good or bad. Even if I'm too much trouble, Papa said I was too much trouble. Even then, though from what I seen today, you're about the least trouble a body could ask for." Sarah studied his face in that intense way she had. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she lay back against the pillow. "Jake, will you tell me about Elizabeth sometime, when it doesn't hurt so much?" The request squeezed his heart, but in a way that wasn't entirely painful. "Someday, when we know each other better." "I'd like that," Sarah said, her eyes already growing heavy.
Good night, Jake.
"Good night, Sarah." Jake returned to his pallet, but this time sleep came easier. The cabin felt different with another person in it, warmer somehow, more alive. He could hear Sarah's quiet breathing, could feel the subtle shift in the air that came from not being alone. "Outside," an owl called, and its mate answered from across the valley. Jake smiled slightly in the darkness. Even the mountain creatures knew that some things were better in pairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He needed to think about winter preparations, about having enough food for two, about school clothes, and whether there was a way to get Sarah some education. He needed to figure out how to raise a girl when he'd barely managed to keep himself alive these past 5 years. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, there was a child sleeping safe in his cabin, no longer wondering if she was worth $50 or if anyone would want her. Tonight, that was enough. As sleep finally took him, Jake thought he heard something he hadn't heard in years, the cabin settling into itself with a contented sound, like a house remembering what it meant to be a home. The first week passed in a rhythm of small discoveries. Sarah learned the mountain's morning sounds, the creek's murmur, the jay's harsh call, the wind through pine needles. Jake learned her quiet ways, how she hummed softly while working, how she touched her mother's picture each night before bed, how she flinched at sudden movements but was brave about everything else. They fell into routines without discussing them. Sarah woke early to help with breakfast. Jake taught her something new each day, and evenings found them by the fire, him working on repairs while she practiced her letters on a piece of slate he'd found. "That's a fine A," Jake said one evening, looking up from the trap he was mending. "Your mama taught you well." Sarah beamed at the praise. She said learning to read was like having a key to the whole world. Even when we didn't have money for much else, she'd find ways to get books. "Smart woman," Jake said, meaning it. He gestured to his small shelf of books. "You're welcome to any of those, once your reading improves." Sarah's eyes went wide. In her world, books were treasures beyond price. "Really? Books ain't meant to sit gathering dust. Elizabeth used to—" He stopped, swallowed. "She loved stories." It was the first time he'd mentioned his daughter without his voice breaking. Sarah seemed to understand the significance, staying quiet but moving a little closer to where he sat. The next morning brought the first serious test of their new arrangement. Jake woke to find Sarah's bed empty, the cabin door ajar. His heart hammered as he pulled on his boots and stepped outside. Terrible possibilities flooding his mind. He found her by the woodpile, struggling with the axe that was nearly as tall as she was.
What in blazes are you doing?
The words came out sharper than intended, powered by fear. Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the axe.
I wanted to help. You split wood every morning, and I thought...
You thought you'd try swinging a tool that could take your foot clean off. Jake's hands were shaking as he took the axe from her.
Sarah, you can't just...
He saw her face crumple and forced himself to stop, to breathe. She wasn't trying to worry him. She was trying to contribute, to prove her worth. The anger drained out of him.
I'm sorry, he said more gently. You scared me is all. I woke up. You were gone. I didn't mean to scare you, Sarah said in a small voice. I just wanted to be useful.
Jake set the axe aside and crouched down to her level. You are useful, but there's things you need to learn proper before trying them. That axe is too heavy for you, and splitting wood takes technique. You could hurt yourself bad. Would you teach me when I'm bigger? When you're bigger, he agreed. For now, how about you help by stacking what I split? That's important work too. They worked together in the crisp morning air, Jake splitting while Sarah carefully arranged the logs. He found himself explaining things as he worked how to read the wood's grain, why some pieces split clean while others fought the axe, how to tell seasoned wood from green.
My papa never explained things, Sarah said as she stacked. He just got mad when I didn't know them already.
Well, that's a fool's way of teaching, Jake said, setting another log on the block.
How's a person supposed to learn if nobody shows them?
That afternoon, Jake decided it was time to walk the nearest trap line. He'd been putting it off, not wanting to leave Sarah alone, but she needed to learn this part of mountain life too. It ain't pretty, he warned as they set out. Trapping, but it's how we survive up here. Sarah nodded solemnly.
I understand. Mama cleaned and cooked plenty of rabbits and such.
I know meat doesn't come from nowhere. The first 2 traps were empty, but the third held a rabbit. Jake showed Sarah how to reset the trap after removing the catch, explaining the importance of checking them regular so animals didn't suffer needlessly. Some folks think it's cruel, he said as they walked to the next spot. And maybe it is, but everything up here lives off something else. The hawk takes the mouse, the wolf takes the deer. We take what we need, no more, and we're grateful for it. Sarah considered this with her usual seriousness. Mama said saying grace over food was thanking God. Seems like we should thank the animal too. Your mama sounds wiser every time you speak of her. At the 4th trap, they found trouble. A coyote had been there first, leaving the trap sprung and empty save for blood and fur. But the tracks in the mud told a worrying story. See here, Jake pointed to the prints. This ain't no ordinary coyote. Too big. And see how that front paw drags injured animal. Probably old. They're the dangerous ones.
Why? Sarah stayed close to his side.
Desperate. Can't hunt proper. So they come closer to cabins. Take chances they normally wouldn't. We'll need to be careful next few days. As if to underscore his words, a howl echoed from the ridge above them, long, mournful, and far too close. Sarah pressed against him, and Jake put a protective hand on her shoulder. We're all right. It's daytime, and we're together. But no going outside alone for a while. Understood. Yes, sir. They finished checking the traps quickly. Jake's eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline. The hair on his neck stayed raised until they were safe inside the cabin again. That night, Jake loaded his rifle and placed it within easy reach. Sarah watched from her bed as he checked the door's bar and shuttered the windows.
Are we in danger?
She asked. Jake considered lying, but she deserved truth. Maybe. Probably that old coyote will move on, find easier hunting, but injured animals don't always do what you expect.
Have you had to shoot animals before, ones that came too close?
A few times. Don't like it, but sometimes it's necessary. He sat on the edge of her bed. Thing is, Sarah, this mountain's beautiful, but it ain't tame. Never forget that. Respect it, learn its ways, but never think it's safe. Sarah nodded, then surprised him by saying,
"I'm glad you're here. I'd be scared alone."
"Well, you ain't alone, and I'm glad you're here too." It was the simple truth. In just a week, the cabin had transformed from a place of exile to something approaching a home. Sarah's presence had brought routine and purpose back to his days. Her quiet humming filled silences that had grown too heavy. Her questions made him see familiar things with new eyes.
"Tell me about when you built this cabin,"
Sarah said, settling deeper into her blankets. Jake leaned back, remembering. "Came up here in the spring of '72. Still had snow on the ground, but I couldn't wait. Needed to be away from everything." He gestured around the sturdy walls. "Took 3 months to get the basic structure up, every log cut and notched by hand."
"Did you build it all alone?"
"Mostly. A trapper named Elijah helped some, taught me things I didn't know. He's the one showed me where the good spring was, which plants were medicine." Jake smiled slightly. Cranky old coot, but he knew these mountains like the back of his hand.
"Where is he now?"
"Died 2 winters back. Found him in his cabin when he didn't show up to trade furs. Buried him up on Crystal Ridge, where he liked to watch the sunrise." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "It seems like these mountains take a lot of people." "They do, but they give a lot too, if you learn to listen." Jake stood, checking the fire one more time. "Now sleep. Tomorrow I'll teach you to fish if the weather holds."
"I'd like that,"
Sarah murmured, already drowsy. Jake settled onto his pallet, rifle within reach. Outside, the injured coyote howled again, farther away now but still threading its loneliness through the night. He understood that sound, the cry of something hurt and alone, trying to survive in a world that didn't much care. But he wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Sarah. Whatever came, whether wolves or the weight of their own wounded hearts, they'd face it together. It wasn't the family either of them had planned, but it was what they had. And already Jake couldn't imagine the cabin without the soft sound of Sarah's breathing in the darkness. He fell asleep thinking about fishing poles and which holes would be best for teaching a child to cast. Simple thoughts, future thoughts, the kind he hadn't allowed himself in years. The kind that suggested maybe, just maybe, they could build something worth having from the broken pieces of their lives. The coyote didn't howl again that night, and the morning came gentle and bright, full of promise. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the peaks like a hungry beast. Jake had been watching the signs, birds flying south sooner than usual, the woolly bears darker than normal, the way the deer moved to lower ground. He pushed himself and Sarah hard through the autumn days, preparing for what he knew was coming. "Stack it higher," he instructed as Sarah piled firewood. "When you think you have enough, double it." Sarah didn't complain about the work, though her hands were red and chapped from the cold. She'd grown stronger in the 2 months since arriving, her thin frame filling out with proper food and mountain air. But Jake knew their real test was coming. The first heavy snow fell in early November, 3 weeks sooner than typical. Jake woke to a world transformed. The familiar landscape buried under 2 feet of white. Sarah stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass.
"It's beautiful,"
she whispered. "Beautiful and deadly," Jake said, joining her. "From now till spring, that snow's our jailer. Everything we need. We better have inside already." They'd done well with preparations. The root cellar was full of potatoes, turnips, and wild onions. Smoked meat hung from the rafters. Jake had traded his best pelts for flour, salt, coffee, and beans. But he knew it might not be enough, not with the early winter, not with 2 mouths to feed. The first week of snow passed peacefully enough. Jake taught Sarah to mend clothes and work leather. She taught him songs her mother had sung, her clear voice filling the cabin with melodies he hadn't heard in years. They read together by firelight, Sarah slowly working through the easier books while Jake helped with difficult words. Then came the night the wolves found them. Jake woke to the sound of something scratching at the door, beside the dying fire. Sarah sat bolt upright in bed.
Jake.
Shh. He reached for his rifle. Listening. The scratching came again. Then a low whine that raised every hair on his neck. Not the injured coyote, this was worse. A howl erupted just outside. So close the cabin walls seemed to shiver. Then another answered from the opposite side. And another. "Wolves," Jake said quietly. "Pack of them. Must be desperate to come this close." Sarah pulled the bearskin up to her chin.
What do they want?
"Smell our meat stores. Most like. Or maybe—" He stopped, but Sarah was too sharp to miss it.
"Or maybe they smell us."
Jake didn't answer, which was answer enough. He built up the fire, adding extra logs until it roared. The light dancing through the window gaps might help keep them at bay. All night the wolves circled. Jake could hear them testing the walls, looking for weakness. Once, something heavy hit the door hard enough to rattle the bar. Sarah crept to Jake's pallet, and he let her curl against his side, his arm around her small shoulders.
"When I was little,"
she whispered, "Mama told me if I was ever scared, I should think of something beautiful. She said fear can't live in the same heart as beauty." "What did you think of her singing Sunday mornings when she'd hum while braiding my hair?" Sarah's voice was steadier now. "What would you think of—" Jake was quiet so long Sarah probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then Elizabeth laughing. She had this way of throwing her head back when something really tickled her, like joy was too big to keep inside. They spent the night like that, trading memories against the dark while wolves prowled outside. By dawn, the pack had moved on, leaving only tracks in the snow, dozens of them, circling the cabin like a noose. The wolves returned every few nights after that, drawn by hunger and the terrible cold. Jake started keeping the rifle loaded and ready at all times. He showed Sarah how to load it, though her hands were too small to shoot it properly. "If something happens to me," he said, demonstrating again how to pour powder and seat the ball, "you bar that door and don't open it for nothing, not even if you hear me calling. Wolves can make sounds that fool you." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sarah said fiercely. "Most likely not, but up here, you plan for the worst and hope for the better." The worst came sooner than expected. Jake was checking the trap line, only the closest ones now, not daring to go far with the pack about. The morning was bitter cold, the kind that made breathing hurt. He'd left Sarah safe in the cabin with strict instructions to keep the door barred. The first sign of trouble was the silence. No birds, no wind. Even his footsteps seemed muffled in the snow. Then he saw the tracks fresh, following his trail from the cabin. The wolves had been watching, learning his patterns. Jake turned back immediately, moving fast as he dared on the icy ground. His heart hammered as he climbed the final ridge and saw the cabin below. Smoke still rose from the chimney. Everything looked normal. Then he saw them. 3 wolves circling the cabin, testing the walls. A 4th stood on the woodpile, trying to reach the roof. And there Jake's blood froze. A 5th had found the small window where the shutters didn't quite meet. He ran, shouting, firing his rifle into the air. The wolves scattered but didn't go far, yellow eyes watching from the tree line. Jake pounded on the door. "Sarah, it's me. Open up." The bar lifted and Sarah's pale face appeared. Jake pushed inside, slamming the door behind him.
"Are you hurt?"
She shook her head, but he could see she'd been crying.
"They kept scratching and calling, making these sounds almost like words. I wanted to look out, but I remembered what you said."
"You did perfect." Jake reloaded the rifle with shaking hands. "Absolutely perfect." That night, the pack returned in force. Jake counted at least 8 distinct howls. They were bolder now, knowing the cabin held prey. One actually got on the roof, its claws scrabbling on the shingles until Jake fired through the ceiling, sending it tumbling off. "We can't go on like this," Jake said as dawn approached. The wolves had only just retreated, and both he and Sarah were exhausted from the sleepless night. "They're not giving up." "What do we do?" Jake stared into the fire, hating what he was about to say. We give them what they want. Part of it, anyway. That afternoon, while the pack slept, Jake hauled a quarter of their smoked venison outside, far from the cabin. It hurt, knowing that meat might mean the difference between eating well and going hungry come March, but staying alive came first. The wolves found the offering that night. Jake and Sarah listened to them fighting over it, snarls and yelps carrying through the darkness. When morning came, the meat was gone, and so were most of the tracks. A few wolves still lingered at the tree line, watching, but the mass of the pack had moved on. Will they come back? Sarah asked, helping Jake check the damage to the walls. Maybe, probably, but not in force like that. We showed them easier meat exists elsewhere. Jake found where claws had gouged deep into the logs. Come spring, I'll show you how to patch these marks. For now, they're a reminder.
Of what?
That the mountain tests everyone. Don't matter if you're man, child, or wolf. Winter makes everyone desperate. He put a hand on her shoulder. But we passed this test, together. Sarah leaned against his side, a gesture of trust that still caught him by surprise. I wasn't as scared as I thought I'd be. Having you here made it better. Having you here made it better too, Jake admitted. Gave me something worth protecting besides my own hide. They spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the cabin's weak spots and restocking the wood pile. The work was hard, but there was satisfaction in it, the deep pleasure of having survived a trial and emerged stronger. That night, as they shared a meal made smaller by their sacrifice to the wolves, Sarah asked, Do you think they're hungry too, the wolves?
I know they are. Everything's hungry in winter.
Then I'm glad we shared, even if it means less for us. Jake looked at this child who'd been sold by her father, who had every reason to be hard and selfish, and felt something shift in his chest. Mary would have liked her. Elizabeth would have adored her. Your mama raised you right, he said softly. Sarah smiled, the expression lighting up her thin face. She used to say kindness didn't cost nothing but meant everything. Outside, snow began to fall again, adding another layer to their winter prison. But inside the cabin was warm and bright, filled with the smell of wood smoke and the quiet companionship of two people who'd found each other in the wilderness. The wolves might return. The food might run low. The cold might deepen. But they'd face it as they'd faced everything else since that day in the saloon together. Jake banked the fire for the night, checking the door's bar one more time. The rifle sat ready, but he doubted they'd need it tonight. The mountain had tested them and found them worthy, at least for now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they could rest, secure in the knowledge that they were no longer alone in facing them. Spring came late that year, fighting through winter's stubborn grip. By April, the snow had finally retreated enough for Jake and Sarah to make their first trip to Cedar Ridge for supplies. They'd survived the winter, but barely their flour was gone, salt running low, and both of them were thinner than when the snow first fell. Remember, Jake said as they descended the mountain trail, townfolk can be peculiar about mountain people. Stay close. Speak only when spoken to. Sarah nodded, her hand tight in his. She wore one of Mary's dresses, taken in and hemmed to fit. Jake had trimmed her hair and scrubbed them both as clean as melted snow allowed. No sense giving the gossips more ammunition than necessary. Cedar Ridge looked exactly as Jake remembered, muddy, suspicious, and small. But after months of isolation, even this rough settlement felt overwhelming. Sarah pressed closer to his side as they walked down Main Street. Their first stop was Henderson's General Store. The proprietor's eyes widened when Jake entered with Sarah. Jake Sullivan, Henderson said slowly.
Heard you bought yourself a girl last fall.
I took in a child who needed a home, Jake corrected, his voice level. Come to buy supplies, not discuss my business. Henderson's wife peered around her husband, studying Sarah with sharp eyes. That the Thompson girl, poor thing. Her father drank himself to death in Millerville come December. Sarah's hand tightened in Jake's, but she showed no other reaction. Jake felt a flash of anger, not at Thompson's death, but that the news had been delivered so carelessly. "We need flour, salt, coffee, and beans," Jake said, "and some fabric if you have it. Girl's growing out of everything." They conducted their business quickly, but Jake noticed the looks, heard the whispers. By the time they reached the street, a small crowd had gathered. Sheriff Brennan stood at its center, his badge glinting in the spring sun. "Jake," the sheriff said, not unkindly, "folks have been talking." "Folks always talk," Jake replied. "Maybe so, but when a man lives alone with a young girl, no wife, no family." Brennan spread his hands. "You understand my position." Jake felt Sarah shrink against him. His protective instinct flared hot. "What I understand is I saved this child from being sold to the highest bidder in your town's saloon while everyone watched. Where was your concern then?" Brennan had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was a bad business, I grant you, but—" "Is the child fed?" A woman pushed through the crowd. Jake recognized Mrs. Caldwell, the minister's wife. "Is she clothed? Does she appear harmed in any way?" She approached Sarah directly, crouching to the girl's level. "Child, you needn't fear speaking true. Has this man hurt you?" Sarah lifted her chin, that familiar stubborn gesture. "Jake saved me. He teaches me letters and numbers. He showed me how to survive the winter." Her voice grew stronger. "He gave up his own food when supplies ran low. He fought off wolves to keep me safe. He's the first person since Mama died who kept his promises." Mrs. Caldwell studied Sarah's face, then stood. "I see no harm here. Sheriff, only a child who's found a protector." "That may be." Another voice cut in. Jake's stomach dropped as Hiram Walsh shouldered forward. "But it ain't proper. Man's got no claim to her, no legal right." "I have papers," Jake interrupted. "Signed by her father, legal as any document in this territory." "Papers obtained when Thompson was drunk," Walsh countered. "Could be contested." "By who?" Jake kept his voice calm despite the rage building in his chest. What claim do you have?" Walsh's face flushed. "I'm a respectable businessman. I could provide proper care." "Like you provide for the girls in your boarding house?" Mrs. Caldwell's voice could have frozen fire. "We all know what kind of care you offer. Mr. Walsh." The crowd stirred uneasily. Walsh's boarding house had a reputation, though nothing that could be proved in court. Sheriff Brennan raised a hand. "Enough, Jake. I'll need to see those papers, and I'll be riding up to check on things from time to time. That's my job." "You're welcome any time," Jake said, "though I wonder where this concern for child welfare was when her own father was selling her like livestock." He gathered their supplies, took Sarah's hand, and started for the edge of town, but Walsh wasn't finished. "This ain't over. Sullivan, that girl deserves a proper Christian home, not some hermit's shack in the wilderness." Jake turned back, and something in his face made Walsh step backward. "You come near my home, my daughter, and you'll find out just how uncivilized this hermit can be." "Your daughter," someone in the crowd murmured. He called her his daughter. Jake hadn't meant to say it, but he didn't take it back. He led Sarah away, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on their backs. They walked in silence until the town disappeared behind them. Then Sarah spoke, her voice small. "Did you mean it what you called me?" Jake stopped walking, set down his pack, and knelt to face her. "I didn't plan to say it, but yes, if you're willing. I know I ain't your real papa, and I'm not trying to replace him or your mama. But seems to me family's about more than blood. It's about choosing to care for each other, come what may." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Papa, my real papa, he never wanted me. Said so all the time. But you chose me. That's better. Isn't it choosing?" "I think so," Jake said, his own eyes burning. "So what do you say, want to be Sarah Sullivan?" Instead of answering, Sarah threw her arms around his neck. Jake held her carefully, feeling something broken inside him beginning to mend. When she pulled back, her face was wet but smiling.
"We should go home," she said. "Papa!"
The word hit him like a physical blow, but a sweet one. They gathered their supplies and continued up the mountain, both quiet with the weight of what had just happened. But as they crested the first ridge, Jake spotted dust rising from the valley. Riders, moving fast up the trail behind them. "Into the trees," he said urgently. "Quick now!" They melted into the forest just as 5 men came into view. Sheriff Brennan led them, with Walsh and 3 others Jake didn't recognize. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but determined.
"What do we do?" Sarah whispered.
"We wait. Trail splits ahead, they might take the wrong fork." But luck wasn't with them. The riders chose correctly, heading straight for Jake's cabin. There was nothing to do but follow, staying hidden, watching to see what they intended. At the cabin, the men dismounted. Walsh immediately began peering through windows while the others spread out, examining the property. "Told you," Walsh said loudly. "Look at this place. Barely fit for animals, much less a young girl." Sheriff Brennan opened the cabin door. Jake had been in too much hurry that morning to bar it properly. The men filed inside, and Jake could hear them moving around, discussing what they saw. Beside him, Sarah was trembling with anger, not fear.
"They have no right,"
she whispered fiercely.
"That's our home."
Our home. The word strengthened Jake's resolve. He stepped out of the trees.
"Find what you're looking for, Sheriff."
The men spun around. Walsh's hand went to his gun, but Brennan stopped him with a gesture. "Just checking on the child's welfare." Brennan said, "It's my duty." "Your duty is to uphold the law." Jake interrupted. "These men are trespassing on my property. I have legal custody of Sarah, witnessed papers to prove it. Unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, you need to leave." "The place is clean," one of the other men admitted. "Food stores, books, 2 separate sleeping areas. Looks proper enough to me."
"Course it looks proper now," Walsh sputtered. "He knew we were coming."
"Did I?" Jake asked mildly. "Did I know you'd violate my home while I was in town? Seems to me the only one acting improper here is you, Walsh." Sarah stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Jake.
"This is my home. Jake is my papa now, legal and true. I won't go with any of you, no matter what you say."
"Mrs." Caldwell appeared at the tree line, breathing hard from the climb.
"Thought I might find you all here. Sheriff,
I've brought someone who wants to speak to this situation." An elderly woman emerged behind her, moving slowly but with dignity. Jake recognized her Mrs. Abigail Morrison, the territorial judge's widow. Her word carried weight in the county.
"I knew Eleanor Thompson,"
Mrs. Morrison said without preamble.
"Lovely woman, terrible taste in husbands. She'd have been grateful to know her daughter found protection."
She fixed Walsh with a steely glare. "And I know exactly why you're so interested in young girls. Hiram Walsh. Best you leave now before I share that knowledge publicly." Walsh's face went from red to white. Without another word, he mounted his horse and rode off. The other men shuffled uncomfortably. Sheriff Brennan cleared his throat. "Seems everything's in order here. Jake, I apologize for the intrusion. Just doing my job, you understand?"
"I understand,"
Jake said, "and you're welcome to visit any time with proper notice and respect." As the riders departed, Mrs. Morrison approached Jake and Sarah. "Eleanor worked in my home before she took ill. She spoke of you often. Child, said you were the light of her life." She smiled at Jake. "Take good care of her, Mr. Sullivan. The world needs more men willing to stand for what's right." After the women left, Jake and Sarah stood alone in their clearing. The cabin looked undisturbed from outside, but Jake knew they'd have to put things right inside.
"They'll be back,"
Sarah said quietly.
"People like Mr. Walsh don't give up easy."
"Maybe,
but we faced them down once.
We'll do it again if needed. Jake put a hand on her shoulder.
This is our home. You're my daughter now. Legal and true, like you said. Nobody's changing that.
They spent the evening putting their home back in order, removing all traces of the intrusion. As night fell and they settled by the fire, Sarah asked, "Do you think Mama would be happy about us? I mean..." Jake considered carefully. "I think she'd be grateful her daughter found a safe place, and I think..." He paused, then continued, "I think my Mary and Elizabeth would be glad I found you. They wouldn't want me alone forever." Sarah moved to sit beside him, leaning against his shoulder as she did when she was tired or worried.
We're a real family now, aren't we? Even if town folks don't like it.
The realest, Jake confirmed. And what town folks think matters less than what we know to be true. Outside, spring peepers began their evening chorus, a sound of renewal and hope. Inside the cabin, a father and daughter sat by the fire, no longer alone, no longer broken. They'd been tested by winter, by wolves, by the judgment of others, and they'd emerge stronger for it. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, and by the simple daily act of caring for one another. Summer brought a false peace to the mountain. Jake and Sarah tended their small garden, fished in the creek, and prepared for another winter. The confrontation with the town seemed like a distant storm that had passed, but Jake had lived long enough to know that men like Walsh didn't forget slights easily. The trouble came on a hot July morning. Jake was teaching Sarah to track deer when he noticed dust rising from the valley trail too much for regular travelers. "Back to the cabin," he said quietly, quick but calm. They made it inside just as 8 riders crested the ridge. Jake recognized some faces from town, but 3 were strangers, hard-looking men with tied-down guns. At their head rode a man in a black suit despite the heat. "Sullivan," the suited man called. "I'm Augustus Crane, attorney at law. I have papers here need discussing." Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed down. "State your business from there." Crane dismounted, pulling documents from his saddlebag. "I represent certain interested parties who question the validity of your claim to the Thompson child. We have witnesses saying her father was intoxicated when he signed those papers. Contract made under such conditions ain't legal." "Her father was drunk more often than sober," Jake replied. "Should we invalidate his whole life?" "Additionally," Crane continued, "we have testimony that you're an unfit guardian, living in isolation, no proper schooling for the child, no church attendance, no female presence for propriety." Sarah appeared at Jake's side.
"I can read and write better than most town children. Jake teaches me from books, and we say prayers every night. What else do I need?"
Crane barely glanced at her. "Children don't decide such matters. Mr. Walsh has generously offered to take responsibility for your upbringing, provide you with a proper home." "No," Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "I know what happens to girls in his boarding house. Mama warned me about men like him." One of the strangers spoke up. "Seems like the girl's got opinions. Maybe we should listen." Crane shot him an irritated look. "We're not here to debate. Sullivan, you can surrender the child peacefully, or we can take this to the territorial judge. Given the circumstances, I doubt he'll rule in favor of a hermit over a respected businessman." Jake felt Sarah trembling beside him. He put a protective hand on her shoulder. "Walsh is many things, but respected ain't one of them, and any judge worth his salt would ask why a single man with a boarding house full of young women wants another girl so badly. Careful with your implications." Crane warned. "Slander's a serious charge." "Truth ain't slander," Jake said evenly. "Now get off my land. You want to take this to court, so be it, but until a judge says otherwise, Sarah stays with me." Crane remounted, his face tight with anger. "You've got 1 week, Sullivan. Either surrender the girl or we'll return with the sheriff and a court order." As the riders departed, one of the strangers lingered. He was younger than the others, with an honest face beneath his dusty hat. "Name's Tom Bradley," he said quietly. "I hired on for what I thought was a simple legal matter, but that child don't look abused to me. And Walsh," he shook his head, "man makes my skin crawl. You might want to prepare for trouble. Friend, real trouble." After he rode off, Jake and Sarah stood in silence. "Finally," she asked, "can they really take me away?" "Not if I can help it." But Jake knew the truth. Money talked in territorial courts, and Walsh had plenty while Jake had little. That night, unable to sleep, Jake made a decision. Come morning, he saddled their old mule and packed supplies. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "To see a friend, maybe the only one who can help us now." They rode deeper into the mountains, following trails Jake hadn't used in years. By afternoon, they reached a small valley where smoke rose from a cabin even more isolated than Jake's. "Benjamin," Jake called. "Ben Cooper, it's Jake Sullivan." A figure emerged, tall, lean, with silver hair to his waist and clothes made entirely of deerskin. Judge Benjamin Cooper, who'd given up a promising legal career to live like a mountain prophet. "Jake Sullivan," Ben said, his voice rusty from disuse. "And who's this?" "My daughter, Sarah. Ben, we need help." They told the story over coffee so strong it could float a horseshoe. Ben listened without interrupting, his keen eyes missing nothing. "Walsh," he said finally. "I remember him from my circuit days. Several complaints, never enough proof." He studied Sarah. "You willing to fight for where you want to be?" "Child." "Yes, sir. Jake's my papa now. I won't let them take me." Ben smiled. "Good. Jake, you still got those custody papers?" Jake produced them. Ben examined them carefully, then laughed a sound like rusty hinges. Thompson might have been drunk, but he was clever drunk. "See this language here? Permanent and irrevocable transfer of all parental rights. That's stronger than most adoption papers. And this witness signature, that's Josiah Mills, the bank president. His word carries weight." "So we can win?" Sarah asked hopefully. "In a fair court, yes, but fairness costs money." Ben stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Unless, Jake, you remember the widow Martinez. Maria, haven't seen her in years. She's territorial judge now, first woman to hold the position, and she's got no love for men who prey on young girls. Her own daughter had trouble with Walsh years back." Hope flickered in Jake's chest. "You think she'd hear our case?" "I think she'd insist on it, if approached right." Ben stood, suddenly energized. "I've been hiding up here too long anyway. Time I practiced law again, even if just once more." They stayed the night, planning strategy. Ben transformed before their eyes, the hermit becoming the lawyer he'd once been. He questioned Sarah gently but thoroughly, preparing her for what she might face in court. "They'll try to make you doubt yourself," he explained. "Make you think Jake can't provide what you need. You must be clear about what you want and why." "I want to stay with Jake," Sarah said firmly. "He's taught me more in a year than I learned in all my life before. He makes me feel safe. He chose me when nobody else wanted me. That makes him my real father." Ben smiled. "Perfect. Say it just like that." They returned to Jake's cabin to find Sheriff Brennan waiting with 2 deputies. "Jake," Brennan said uncomfortably, "I've got orders to check on the child's welfare again. Crane insisted—" "Sheriff," Ben interrupted, stepping forward. "I'm Benjamin Cooper, attorney at law. I represent Mr. Sullivan and his daughter in this matter. Any questioning happens in my presence." Brennan's eyes widened. "Judge Cooper thought you were dead." "Retired, not dead. Now, what's this about?" "Crane says there's evidence of neglect. Wants the girl examined by the town doctor. Interviewed without Sullivan present." "Absolutely not," Ben said calmly. "If there's to be an examination, it happens with both her father and legal counsel present. As for interviewing a minor without her guardian, that's beyond your authority. Sheriff, and you know it." Brennan looked relieved. "Just following orders. Judge, you know how it is." "I do, and I know you're a fair man. So here's what we'll do. Tomorrow, we all go to town. Sarah will speak to Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison's son, I believe with Jake present. Then we'll petition Judge Martinez for an immediate hearing." "Fair." "More than fair." Brennan agreed. "Truth told, this whole business sits wrong with me, but the law's the law." That evening, as they prepared for the battle ahead, Sarah sat between Jake and Ben by the fire. "Are you scared?" Ben asked her gently. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "But Jake taught me that being scared don't mean you don't do what's right. It just means you do it anyway." Jake felt his throat tighten. When had this small, wounded child become so strong? "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know something. This year with you has been the best I've known since I lost my family. You brought life back to this old cabin, and to me, I'm proud to call you daughter." Sarah leaned against him. "And I'm proud to call you Papa. We'll win tomorrow. We have to because we're family, and families don't give up on each other." Ben raised his coffee cup. "To family, then, and to justice. Sometimes they're the same thing." Outside, night settled over the mountain. Tomorrow would bring the fight of their lives. But tonight they had each other, and hope, and the determination that comes from love worth protecting. It would have to be enough. The Cedar Ridge Courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Word had spread like wildfire that Judge Benjamin Cooper had come down from the mountains to face Augustus Crane in court. Add in the scandal of Walsh trying to claim a young girl, and half the territory seemed to have gathered to watch. Judge Maria Martinez sat behind the bench, her silver hair pulled back severely, her dark eyes missing nothing. She'd insisted on hearing the case immediately, overriding Crane's attempts at delay. "This court will determine the legal custody of Sarah Thompson," Judge Martinez announced. "Mr. Crane, you represent Mr. Walsh in challenging the current arrangement." "I do, Your Honor." Crane stood, smooth as oil. "We contend that the child was sold under duress by a man incapable of making legal decisions. Furthermore, Mr. Sullivan is unfit to raise a young girl." "One matter at a time." Judge Martinez interrupted. "Present your evidence regarding the original transfer." Crane called his first witness, a man from the saloon who claimed Thompson was falling down drunk when he sold Sarah. But under Ben's cross-examination, the witness admitted he'd been drinking heavily himself that night. "So you were intoxicated, yet you claim perfect recall of another man's condition?" Ben asked mildly. The witness squirmed. "Well, I remember enough." "Do you remember Mr. Walsh being present that night bidding on the child?" The man went pale. There were lots of folks there." "Yes or no? Was Hiram Walsh bidding to purchase Sarah Thompson?" "Yes," the witness admitted quietly. A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Martinez's expression hardened slightly. The next witness was Josiah Mills, the bank president who'd witnessed the papers. Crane tried to shake his testimony, but Mills stood firm. "Thompson may have been a drinker," Mills stated, "but he knew what he was doing. He wanted his daughter away from that life. Said selling her to Jake Sullivan was the one good thing he'd done as a father." Sarah gripped Jake's hand tighter at those words. Dr. Morrison testified next, describing his examination of Sarah that morning. "The child is healthy, well-nourished, and shows no signs of abuse or neglect. In fact, she's gained healthy weight and her general condition has improved significantly since last year. She also demonstrated reading and arithmetic skills above average for her age." Finally, Crane called Walsh himself. The boarding house owner took the stand with practiced confidence, presenting himself as a pillar of the community concerned only with a child's welfare. "I've provided homes for many young women," Walsh testified. "Given them employment, respectability. I simply wanted to extend that same opportunity to this poor girl." Ben rose for cross-examination, his eyes sharp as the winter wind. Mr. Walsh, how many young women currently reside in your boarding house? 8, Walsh replied. And their ages? Walsh shifted. Various ages, all of legal majority. All of them. What about Lucy Garrett? Isn't she 15? She works as a maid. Her family sent her. Her family sent her, or her father sold her debts to you. Ben produced a document. I have here a contract remarkably similar to what you attempted with Sarah Thompson. Crane objected, but Judge Martinez allowed it. The document clearly showed Walsh had purchased Lucy's labor to pay her father's gambling debts. This is different, Walsh protested. That's a labor contract. For a 15-year-old girl, locked into service until she's 21 or until she repays a debt she didn't incur. Ben's voice grew harder. Tell me, Mr. Walsh, what happens to girls who try to leave your employment early? Walsh's face flushed. They're free to go once their debts are paid. Debts that somehow grow larger each month with charges for room, board, clothing, even the soap they use to wash. Ben turned to the crowd. I have 3 more such contracts here, Your Honor. All young girls, all trapped in Mr. Walsh's respectable establishment. The courtroom erupted. Judge Martinez gavelled for order. This isn't about my business, Walsh snarled. It's about whether that mountain hermit can raise a girl proper. Then let's ask the girl. Ben said simply, Your Honor, we request Sarah Sullivan be allowed to speak. Sarah took the stand, small but straight-backed. She looked directly at Judge Martinez as she spoke. Before Jake found me, I was nothing, worth less than the whiskey my papa wanted. Nobody cared if I ate or had warm clothes or knew my letters. Jake changed all that. He gave up his own food when rations ran low last winter. He taught me to read and write and do sums. He fought off wolves to keep me safe. She turned to look at Walsh. I know what you really want. Mr. Walsh, Mama warned me about men like you before she died. She said some folks pretend kindness but mean harm. Jake never pretends. He's rough and quiet, but he's good all through. What do you want? Sarah, Judge Martinez asked gently. I want to stay with my papa, Sarah said firmly. With Jake, he chose me when nobody else would. That makes him my real father, not the one who sold me for drinking money. Jake had to wipe his eyes. He wasn't alone, Mrs. Caldwell and several other women were openly weeping. Does Mr. Sullivan have anything to say? Judge Martinez asked. Jake stood slowly. I ain't much for speeches. Your Honor, I know I'm not what most folks picture as a father. I live simple, away from town. But I love that girl like she was my own blood. She brought me back to life when I thought I'd stay buried with my first family forever. I promise you, she'll want for nothing I can provide. She'll be educated, protected, and loved. That's all I got to offer, but I offer it complete. Judge Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Crane, any final arguments? Crane stood, but his polished confidence had cracked. The law requires proper guardianship. Mr. Crane. Judge Martinez interrupted. I've heard enough. Mr. Cooper, do you have the original custody papers? Ben presented them. Judge Martinez examined them carefully. These papers are legal and binding. Furthermore, this court finds no evidence of unfitness on Mr. Sullivan's part. Quite the opposite, he has provided a stable, nurturing home for a child who desperately needed one. Her gaze fixed on Walsh. As for Mr. Walsh's concern for child welfare, this court finds it suspicious at best, predatory at worst. Sheriff Brennan, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the boarding house contracts presented today. Walsh jumped up. You can't. Sit down, Mr. Walsh, or I'll have you removed. Judge Martinez's voice could have frozen hell. It is the judgment of this court that Jake Sullivan retains full and permanent custody of Sarah Sullivan, whom he may legally adopt if he so chooses. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted again, this time in celebration. Sarah flew into Jake's arms, both of them crying openly now. Ben clapped Jake on the shoulder, grinning wider than anyone had seen in years.
"We did it, Papa,"
Sarah sobbed.
"We really did it."
"No, little one." Jake managed through his own tears. "You did it. You stood up there brave as any grown woman and spoke your truth." Walsh and Crane slunk out through a side door, but not before Sheriff Brennan intercepted them. "Mr. Walsh, I'll need you to come to my office. Got some questions about those contracts." As the crowd dispersed, many stopped to congratulate Jake and Sarah. Mrs. Morrison pressed a small purse into Jake's hand. "For the girls' education," she said firmly, refusing his protests. Eleanor Thompson was a good woman. She'd be so happy to see her daughter cherished. Outside the courthouse, in the bright mountain sunshine, Jake and Sarah stood with Ben. "How can we thank you?" Jake asked. Ben smiled, looking more alive than he had in years. "You already have. Reminded me why I loved the law once, not for rich men's games, but for moments like this. Besides, I might come down from my mountain more often now. Town's more interesting than I remembered." As they prepared for the journey home, Sarah slipped her hand into Jake's. "Papa, can we stop at Mama's grave on the way? I want to tell her about today. Tell her I found my home." "Of course," Jake said, squeezing her hand gently. "She'd be mighty proud of you." They left Cedar Ridge different than they'd arrived, not as a man and a child bound by desperate circumstances, but as a true family, recognized by law and community alike. The mountain waited for them, its peaks touched with afternoon gold, promising hard winters and peaceful summers, struggles and joys, all the complexities of a life lived together. That evening, safe in their cabin, Jake and Sarah sat by the fire. The custody papers lay on the table, but they didn't need to look at them. The real proof of their family was in the comfortable silence, the shared glances, the simple peace of being home. "Papa," Sarah said, looking up from the book she was reading, one of Elizabeth's old favorites, "do you think we'll have more adventures?" Jake smiled, thinking of all the seasons ahead, all the lessons yet to teach and learn. "I expect we will, little one. But the best adventure is the one we're living right now, just being a family." Sarah smiled back, then returned to her book. Outside, the first stars appeared over the mountain peaks. Inside, a father and daughter continued the quiet, daily adventure of loving each other, building a future from the ashes of their pasts. The girl who'd once wondered if she was worth $50 had found her answer. She was priceless, cherished, chosen. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts on Jake and Sarah's journey. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to share more tales of the American frontier with you.